They say that when a plane is going down, the cabin doesn't scream immediately. There is a moment, a split second of suspended gravity where everyone is just waiting. Waiting for the pilot to fix it. Waiting for the physics to correct themselves. Waiting to wake up. I was in that moment. I was sitting in conference room B on the 42nd floor of Vanguard Holdings. The room was nicknamed the Aquarium. Glass walls on all four sides. A view of Manhattan that cost $600 a square foot. It was designed to make you feel like a god looking down on the ants. But today, I didn't feel like a god. I felt like the specimen. Across the table sat Elena. Elena. The woman I had hired 3 years ago. The woman whose resume I had pulled out of the trash because I saw a hunger in her that reminded me of myself. I taught her how to dress for the boardroom. I taught her how to read a variance report without blinking. I taught her that in mergers and acquisitions, silence is a weapon louder than any shout. And now she was using that silence against me. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at her iPad, scrolling through a document I knew she hadn't read. Her fingernails were painted a sharp, glossy oxblood red. They looked like talons. "It's not personal, Amelia," she said. That phrase. The universal prologue to the most personal knife in the back you will ever experience. I looked at her. I didn't blink. I wanted to scream. I wanted to reach across the mahogany table and shake her until the veneers cracked. I wanted to list the weekends I had spent in this office while she was out in the Hamptons networking. I wanted to remind her that my marriage ended in this very room, on a phone call I took during a closing negotiation 2 years ago. But I didn't. Because I am a professional. And professionals do not scream, we calculate. Not personal, I repeated. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. Too calm. Okay. Walk me through it, Elena. Why now? We are 72 hours away from the Titan signatures. The regulatory bodies in Brussels are waiting for my compliance affidavit on Tuesday. Elena finally looked up. There was a tightness around her eyes. Fear? No. Excitement. She was high on the adrenaline of the kill. The board feels, she started, correcting herself. I feel that the Titan merger needs a fresh face for the press cycle. You've done the heavy lifting, Amelia, and we appreciate it, but the integration phase requires a different kind of energy. Energy, that was the code word. She meant youth. She meant shine. She meant that now that I had built the engine, stripped the wires, and poured the fuel, she wanted to be the one to turn the key and smile for the cameras. Project Titan. Let me tell you about Project Titan. It wasn't just a merger. It was a $4 billion acquisition of a European logistics AI firm. It was the kind of deal that defines a decade. It was the reason our stock price had doubled in 6 months. It was complex, messy, and legally treacherous. And it was mine. I had built the architecture of the deal in my head. I knew where the bodies were buried. I knew which regulatory loopholes we were threading through. I knew the name of the German compliance officer's daughter. Elena didn't know any of that. Elena thought the deal was a stack of papers. She didn't understand that it was a spiderweb. You're firing me, I said. It wasn't a question. We're restructuring your role, she corrected. We're offering you a generous severance package. 6 months' pay. Continued health benefits. And, of course, a non-disparagement agreement. She slid a thick folder across the glass table. It stopped inches from my hand. The non-disparagement agreement. The muzzle. If I sign this, I said, looking at the folder, I can't talk to the press. I can't talk to the clients. I disappear. You retire, she smiled. A tight practice smile. You've worked hard, Amelia. Take a vacation. Go to. I don't know. Tuscany. I looked out the window. The gray sky over Jersey City looked like a bruise. I thought about the last 2 years, the nights I slept on the office sofa, the missed birthdays, the way my husband looked at me when he packed his bags, telling me I was married to a ghost. I had given everything to this company, to this deal. And now, 72 hours before the finish line, Elena was cutting the rope. She wanted the credit. That was the simple, ugly truth. If I was here on Tuesday, the Wall Street Journal profiles would be about me. If I was gone, she became the architect of the Titan merger. She became the youngest VP in the company's history. It was theft. Plain and simple. A thought crossed my mind then. A dangerous, jagged thought. I could warn her. I could tell her about the Brussels compliance server. You see, Project Titan wasn't just money. It was data. Highly sensitive, encrypted algorithmic data. To get the European regulators to agree to the sale, I had to set up a specific security protocol. A key holder protocol. Every 48 hours, the lead strategist me had to biometrically authenticate the data integrity. It was a handshake between our server and the European Central Bank. If the handshake didn't happen, the data locked down. It encrypted itself. It became a brick. It was a safety measure I had installed to prevent corporate espionage. Elena didn't know about it. It was in the technical addendum on page 400 of the merger agreement. The page she skipped because it was boring IT stuff. I looked at her. I looked at the red nails tapping impatiently on the table. If I told her, she would demand the password. She would demand I transfer the biometric key. She would keep her prize. If I stayed silent, well. If I stayed silent, the clock would start ticking the moment I walked out that door. I put my hand on the folder. The leather of the notebook felt cold. I need my personal items, I said softly. Elena exhaled. A breath of relief. She thought she had won. She thought I was rolling over. Security is waiting outside, she said. They'll escort you to your desk. You have 20 minutes. 20 minutes, I nodded. To pack up 15 years. Standard protocol, Amelia. You know how it is. I do, I said. I wrote the protocol. I stood up. My legs felt heavy, but I locked my knees. I looked at the view one last time. The gray water. The statues of commerce. I looked at Elena. Good luck with the closing, Elena, I said. There was no sarcasm in my voice. Just a flat, dead calm. She didn't hear the warning in it. She just heard the surrender. Thanks, Amelia, she said, already looking back at her iPad. Leave your badge at the front desk. I walked out of the aquarium. The office floor was busy. Analysts were running back and forth with coffees. Traders were shouting into headsets. Nobody looked at me. When you are fired, you become invisible instantly. You are a ghost haunting your own life. A security guard, a man named Ralph who I had bought Christmas cookies for 5 years in a row, stepped up beside me. He looked embarrassed. He wouldn't meet my eyes. I'm sorry, Miss Vance, he mumbled. Just doing my job. It's okay, Ralph, I whispered. We're all just doing our jobs. I walked to my office. My corner office. I didn't take much. I didn't take the Rolodex, I had memorized it. I didn't take the deal files, I had written them. I took a framed photo of my dog. I took my favorite fountain pen. And I took a small, red leather notebook that I kept locked in the bottom drawer. Elena thought the company's power was in the servers. She was wrong. The power was in the details she ignored. The favors owed. The shortcuts taken. The bodies buried. I put the notebook in my purse. Ready, ma'am? Ralph asked. Ready, I said. I walked to the elevator bank, the walk of shame. Heads turned as I passed. I could feel the whispers starting. Did you see? Amelia's out. Elena took her head. I held my head high. I focused on the rhythm of my heels on the marble floor. I stepped in. I turned around to face the floor one last time. And there she was. Elena. Standing at the glass wall of the conference room watching me leave, she held a glass of champagne. At 10 a.m., she raised the glass to me, a mock toast. I didn't wave back. I just watched her as the silver doors began to slide shut. She was celebrating. She thought she had just cut off the dead weight. She thought she had just secured the biggest victory of her career. She didn't realize that she was standing on a trapdoor. And I was the one holding the lever. The elevator dropped. My stomach dropped with it. I was unemployed. I was humiliated. I was alone. But as the numbers above the door counted down 30, 20, 10, I felt something else rising in my chest. It wasn't sadness. I looked at the reflection of my own eyes in the polished metal doors. I looked tired. I looked older than I was. But the fire wasn't out. The timer had started. Elena had 48 hours to figure out that she didn't just fire an employee. She had fired the nervous system of a $4 billion organism. And when that organism realized its brain was gone, it was going to start screaming. I stepped out into the lobby. The air conditioning was cold. I walked past the reception desk where I had greeted clients for a decade. I pushed through the revolving doors and stepped out onto the street. The rain hit me instantly. Cold, shocking. It soaked through my silk blouse in seconds. I stood there on the curb, clutching my box of belongings. People rushed past me, shielding themselves with umbrellas, running for cover. I didn't run. I took a deep breath of the wet, metallic air. I tasted the ozone. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I knew who it was. It was the automated system. Alert, user disconnected. Keyholder protocol initiated. T-minus 47 hours, 59 minutes to lockdown. I didn't check it. I didn't cancel it. I just hailed a cab. Where to, lady? The driver asked. I looked back up at the tower. At the 42nd floor, I imagined Elena pouring another glass of champagne. Home, I said. And take the scenic route. I have some time to kill. I thought the hardest part would be leaving. I thought the silence of my apartment would break me, but I was wrong. The hardest part wasn't the silence. It was the noise that started 3 hours later, when the phone rang. And it wasn't Elena. It was the one person I thought I could trust. The quiet was heavier than the storm. When you spend 15 years in the constant, manic roar of the market, the adrenaline, the ringing, the shouting, the whispered deals, silence becomes a physical thing. It presses down on your chest. It tells you you're dead. I didn't unpack the box. I didn't open the red ledger. I didn't even take off my work heels. I just walked to the window. My apartment faces east. I could see Vanguard Tower, Elena's glass box rising sharp and cruel across the water. It looked close enough to touch. But it was a world away. I poured myself a glass of cold Sauvignon Blanc. I wasn't celebrating. I was drinking to the memory of the woman I used to be. The woman who would have already called 3 lawyers, 6 journalists, and 2 crisis management firms. The new Amelia. She just watched. The first 3 hours were the calm before the gravity wave. Elena was still drunk on her victory. She was probably on the phone, telling her father what a brilliant move she'd made, how she had cleaned up the Titan deal, and how the promotion was practically guaranteed. She didn't realize the system was already trying to call for help. At 1:15 p.m., the automated calls started. First, the system tried to call my desk phone. Then my work mobile. Then my personal number. It was the keyholder protocol's first automated warning. Integrity check due. Data lock initiating in T-minus 45 hours. I silenced my personal phone. I didn't block the number. I wanted to see the dance. At 2 p.m., the IT director, a nervous man named Gary, called. I let it go to voicemail. Gary's voice was thin, frantic. Amelia, look, I don't know what Elena told you, but the Titan server is acting up. It's asking for a biometric reauth. I can't override it. She said you have a thumb drive? Call me back. Please, for the love of God, call me back. A thumb drive. The poor man thought it was a file they lost. He didn't understand it was a self-destruct mechanism built into the core framework. Elena wouldn't tell him the truth. She couldn't. Admitting the complexity would mean admitting my necessity. She would try to solve the $4 billion problem with a simple IT ticket. It was 3:45 p.m. And that's when the noise finally started. It wasn't Elena. It was Sarah. Sarah was my junior analyst. Quiet, brilliant, loyal to me, not the institution. The one person I thought I could trust, because I had seen the same hungry ambition in her that Elena had shown. But Sarah still had a conscience. Her first text was simple. Are you okay? My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I didn't reply. Her second text, 10 minutes later, was the one that pulled me back into the game. E is saying you left files unsecured. Mr. Vance signed off on the statement. They're blaming the hiccup on your negligence. Negligence. That was the lie. That was the official version they were handing to the board. Elena had fired me. Mr. Vance, the CEO who I respected, had signed the death warrant on my reputation. He stood by her because of the pressure from her father, the main shareholder. The man who cared more about profit margins than corporate ethics. Mr. Vance. The betrayal from him felt colder, sharper, than Elena's. Elena was a viper I knew was going to strike. Vance was a shepherd who led me to the slaughter. I picked up the phone. I didn't call. I typed a reply to Sarah. Do not call me. Text only. What is Elena doing now? The reply was immediate. Sarah was already a soldier in the shadows. She's panicked. She's locked herself in conference room C with Gary IT and the chief counsel. They're trying to generate a new authentication key, but the system keeps looping the European regulatory warning. Good. The system was doing its job. The keyholder protocol didn't just lock the data. It sent a digital ping to the ECB that read, "Integrity check failed. Access attempted by unauthorized parties." It was a silent alarm. The kind that doesn't scream but whispers disaster in the right ears. I typed my next question. The crucial one. Did she mention the addendum 4.3? The compliance affidavit due Tuesday. Sarah's reply was a revelation, a second betrayal I hadn't prepared for. She said she found a faster way months ago. She bypassed the affidavit using a temporary security waiver from the Internal Audit Department. She told the board it expedited the deal. I closed my eyes. The glass box across the water seemed to tilt. Elena hadn't just tried to steal the credit. She had exposed the entire company to criminal liability months ago. The compliance affidavit, the one I was supposed to sign, was a legal shield. By bypassing it, she had ensured that the moment the deal failed, it wouldn't just be an aborted acquisition. It would be a full-scale regulatory investigation. And I had known nothing about it. She did this while I was still working there. She didn't just fire me to take the glory. She fired me because she was already standing on a mountain of illegal shortcuts, and she needed a scapegoat. She needed me gone so she could say I was the one who authorized the waiver before leaving. The cold calculation I had felt earlier evaporated, replaced by a searing, white-hot fury. This wasn't just corporate politics. This was attempted professional murder. I got up. I walked to the kitchen and dumped the glass of wine down the sink. I didn't need alcohol. I needed clarity. I opened the red ledger. I flipped to a random page. It was a picture of Elena's expense reports, luxury jet flights to Munich, listed as client meetings, when I knew she was meeting her clandestine boyfriend. Insignificant, but telling. I texted Sarah one last instruction. It was the first move in the game. Find the security waiver. Get a copy. Don't let anyone see. A minute later, a simple text arrived. Done. I smiled. Sarah was fast. And Sarah had just handed me the legal basis for the largest corporate takedown in New Jersey history. I had been prepared to watch her lose the merger. Now, I was going to make her lose her life. Her career. Her reputation. Everything she stole from me. I looked at the clock. T-40 hours to data lockdown. The countdown was my ally. Elena was still trying to pick the lock, but she didn't know that once the lock broke, the alarm wouldn't just ring in Brussels. It would ring right here, in the cold, wet streets of New Jersey. And I would be the only one listening. I thought I had time. I thought I could move slowly, deliberately. But Elena, in her desperation, was about to make a move that would force my hand. I didn't know it yet, but across the river, the CEO, Mr. Vance, wasn't just signing off on the lie. He was planning to burn the evidence. And if he succeeded, my quiet revenge would become impossible. Rage is loud. Revenge is quiet. The fury I felt when I learned about Elena's security waiver, the one she signed off on. The one she intended to pin on me, that fury was a fuel source. It wasn't messy or hot. It was pure, crystalline energy. She hadn't just tried to derail my career. She had tried to indict me. I looked at the document Sarah had sent. A simple PDF, digitally signed by Elena and the chief auditor, a temporary security waiver for addendum 4.3. The kind of waiver that says, we know this is illegal, but we're going to do it anyway and worry about the consequences later. The consequences had arrived. And they were standing on my former chief executive's doorstep, Mr. Vance. Mr. Vance, the CEO, was a predictable animal. He chased the easiest exit. If the Titan merger collapsed now, he faced the public humiliation of a $4 billion failure, plus the legal nightmare of the regulatory violation. His solution, I knew, wouldn't be to confess. It would be to clean up the mess and sacrifice the easiest target. Me. I opened the red ledger. It wasn't just a physical book. It was the key to my parallel infrastructure. Years ago, I had learned to fear the corporate firewall. I built my own backdoor not for malice but for protection. I used an old, encrypted satellite line maintained by an acquaintance in offshore finance. It allowed me to listen to Vanguard's internal network without being on it. I wasn't hacking the system. I was listening to the static. I bypassed the emails. Too public. I went straight for the encrypted messaging service, the one they used for the truly sensitive conversations. The whisper channel. I filtered the traffic: Vance, Elena, and Marcus Thorne, the chief counsel. The three people currently deciding my fate. The first message popped up. From Elena to Vance, time-stamped 8:30 p.m. Vance. Thorne is panicking about the protocol lock. He says if we force it, the ECB gets an alert. Vance's reply. 8:31 p.m. Sharp. Cold. We force it. We have 36 hours before the market opens in Frankfurt. Thorne, prepare the statement. Blame the unauthorized departure of Amelia. We need a clear scapegoat. There it was. Scapegoat. But the next few messages were the ones that made the air in my apartment feel thin and poisonous. They were about the waiver. Thorne. Elena, we need to locate and shred any physical copies of that 4.3 waiver. If the SEC sees this, the legal exposure is massive. It proves intent. Done. I checked the paper files myself. All purged. Good. Thorne, can you purge the digital record in the audit server? Make it look like Amelia downloaded it and deleted the original. They were planning a digital ghost murder. They were going to wipe the system clean of Elena's guilt and leave my digital fingerprints all over the crime scene. If they succeeded, the waiver Sarah had sent me would look like a forgery. I would have a document proving my innocence, but the entire corporate server would testify against me. I had 36 hours until the European market opened and Vanguard needed to present the data. But I had maybe 12 hours until Thorne purged the electronic record of the waiver. I couldn't wait for the keyholder protocol to collapse the deal. I had to move now to secure the evidence. I went back to the red ledger. This notebook wasn't just filled with secrets, it was a record of system vulnerabilities. A gift from a former colleague who now regretted his ethics. Page 17. The Vanguard audit server architecture. The server wasn't connected to the main network. It was air-gapped. But it was maintained by Gary, the nervous IT director who had left me that frantic voicemail. Gary's login protocol was predictable. He used an external maintenance terminal located on the ground floor of the parking garage. The terminal was secured by a single-factor password, changed every 2 weeks. I needed that password. And I knew exactly how Gary chose them. His password was always a combination of the current date and his mother's maiden name. A risk? Absolutely. If I tried to log in and failed, the alert would go off instantly. They would know I was watching. But inaction was guaranteed ruin. I texted Sarah again, using the encrypted burner phone I kept in the red ledger's hidden compartment. Need one piece of non-confidential data. Gary's mother's maiden name. It took Sarah 5 minutes. 5 minutes of tense silence where the weight of the revenge strategy settled fully onto my shoulders. Jenkins. Today's date was the 14th. The password was likely 14 Jenkins. Simple. Pathetic. And now, my key to the kingdom. I initiated a secure, proxy connection, routing through 3 different international servers before it touched the Vanguard network. I was a ghost approaching the glass box. I had to be surgical. I couldn't just delete the purge order. I had to modify it. I needed to create a digital time lock. I needed the waiver to vanish, but only temporarily, just long enough for Thorne to report the success to Vance. Then, I needed the waiver to reappear not on the Vanguard system but somewhere more public. Somewhere outside their control. Come on, Gary. Don't let me down. The screen flashed green. Access granted. I was in. I was inside the air-gapped audit server. I found Thorne's script, the command line set to purge the waiver data at 6 a.m., making it look like an external attack. I didn't delete the script. I injected one line of code, a short, elegant block of Python that would delay the purge by exactly 48 hours, and more importantly, mirror the file to an external, public-facing cloud storage account, a digital dead drop. The waiver was safe. The evidence was secured. But I wasn't done. I had to leave a message. A subtle shift in the code that would only be noticed by someone truly paranoid. In the comments section of Thorne's purge script, I added a single, innocuous line, a reference to the very first conversation Elena and I had about the Titan merger, years ago. A line of poetry. The shadow knows the depth of the light. It was nothing to Vance. Nothing to Thorne. But Elena would see it, and she would know the game had changed. She would know I was watching. And that was the beginning of her true panic. I had saved the evidence, but I had exposed myself. The digital time lock I set gave me 48 hours of safety. But the moment Elena read that single line of poetry, she would stop fighting the keyholder protocol, she would start fighting me. And my next move had to be personal. It wasn't about the company anymore. It was about making Elena pay for the negligence she tried to frame me with. I needed to hit her where she was most vulnerable. I needed to find the boyfriend. My victory in Chapter 3 was quiet, but it wasn't decisive. It bought me time. I had moved the smoking gun, the illegal security waiver, to a secure external location, safe from Thorne's midnight purge. But to Vance and Elena, everything looked fine. They had the purge scheduled. They thought the evidence of their conspiracy was about to turn to dust. The keyholder protocol, however, was still screaming. T-36 hours. The data lock was imminent. I was sitting in my living room, watching the digital noise, and for the first time since my termination, I felt a sense of control. The glass box across the water had become my own personal theater, and Sarah was my stage manager. Elena just told the executive committee it's a targeted external attack. She called it a retaliatory hack from the competitor, using my unsecured network. She's brilliant. She's using the press story she created about your negligence to explain the lock. It makes sense to the lawyers. Elena was good at spinning narratives. She wasn't just lying, she was building a fortress of lies. She took two facts, the lock and my firing, and constructed a perfect, plausible fiction. The disgruntled former employee tried to sabotage the deal, but we caught her just in time. The beauty of the keyholder protocol, however, was that its purpose was protection. It locked the data. It didn't destroy it. But Elena needed the data now. The European bank was demanding proof of algorithmic integrity before the Frankfurt market opened. I imagined the scene. The air would be thick with desperation and the scent of expensive fear. Elena would be pacing, her red nails tapping against the glass wall. Thorne, the chief counsel, would be sweating through his tailored suit. He understood liability. He knew a regulatory investigation would kill his career faster than a corporate firing. Vance, the weak shepherd, would be staring at the stock ticker, watching the fractions of a percent melt away with every hour of delay. We need to break the lock, Thorne, Vance would snarl. Now? We'll cover the legal later. We need the data, or the deal collapses. We can't, sir, Thorne would counter, his voice cracking. If we force the encryption key, the system is designed to alert the ECB that the data has been compromised. That triggers the audit, Vance. That triggers the criminal liability. But Elena wouldn't care about liability. She cared about the prize, the $4 billion. The promotion, the applause. Thorne. We'll spin the ECB alert as a false positive. We'll blame the hackers. We'll tell them we secured the data but had to bypass the final security wall. They're slow. They're bureaucrats. They'll buy it. And Vance, desperate, weak, and seeing his legacy crumble, would nod. He would always side with the quick fix. He would always sign the waiver, figuratively or literally. That's the thing about people who take shortcuts. They never respect complexity. They think they can bulldoze the system because they think the system is stupid. Elena thought she was smart because she found the waiver. She thought she was brilliant because she had an aggressive, expensive cyber team working right now to override my keyholder protocol. But she didn't realize that the keyholder protocol wasn't the lock. It was the detonator. If they succeeded in forcing entry and they had 36 hours to do it, they would achieve two things. First, they would temporarily access the data. Second, they would immediately initiate the criminal regulatory audit. They would have won the battle, only to start the war with the German federal police. But I couldn't just rely on the European audit. That was too slow. My reputation was being shredded now. I needed to strike where Elena was most vulnerable. I needed to cut the emotional wiring, not just the financial. I had the secured waiver. I had the insight into their communications. But I needed a lever that would move Vance against Elena. A secret so toxic it would shatter their alliance instantly. Thorne just left the meeting. He looks sick. Elena told Vance they need to fix the narrative before the merger closes. She's going to be out of the office for a while. She said she has a personal emergency. A personal emergency. On the eve of a $4 billion merger. That was my opening. Elena didn't have personal emergencies. She had calculations. I opened the red ledger again, turning past the pages detailing the expense reports. The luxury jet flights. The client meetings in Munich. My source for that information was impeccable, a former colleague who oversaw the executive private jet hangar. The jet was never for clients. It was for her boyfriend, a high-ranking executive at a rival firm. The firm that Vanguard was currently suing for patent infringement. If this became public, it wouldn't just be professional misconduct. It would be industrial espionage. A conflict of interest so profound it would invalidate every decision Elena had ever made. A lie is a debt. Eventually, you have to pay it back with interest. Elena just took out a loan she can never repay. But to make this hit, I needed more than just a flight log. I needed undeniable, visual proof. I needed the final, heartbreaking piece of the betrayal puzzle. I needed to go to Munich. Have you ever seen someone dig a hole so deep they couldn't see the sky anymore? Elena was convinced she was digging her way to freedom, but she was only digging her own grave. If you're enjoying this cold, calculated story of corporate karma, make sure to subscribe. We're just watching the first domino fall. Now, I was about to leave the safety of my apartment. I was about to step off the stage and back into the game. And the first person who saw me, the first person who recognized the ghost, could end everything. The firing was a personal injury. The security waiver was an attempted murder of my reputation. But the discovery of Julian Hess, the rival executive in Munich, that was an act of treason. Elena thought she was flying under the radar. She claimed a personal emergency and slipped away on the eve of a $4 billion transaction. She was banking on the chaos of the keyholder protocol and Vance's desperation to cover her absence. But Elena didn't just disappear. She took the executive jet, the company asset I had personally authorized for emergency M&A travel. And the executive jet never goes dark. Not if you know the right people, the people who track transponder codes for a living. The contacts logged in my red ledger. I made 2 calls from my burner phone. The first was to my contact, a retired intelligence analyst who specialized in asset tracking, now working in offshore finance. The second was to a private charter company that owed me a very large favor from a previous ethically dubious deal. I was booking passage on the next available transatlantic flight, route hopping to avoid direct surveillance. 12 hours after Elena toasted my exit, I was sitting on a red-eye to Munich, not as Amelia, the M&A strategist, but as Anne, a quiet consultant with a forged ID, a deep hood, and one purpose: to expose the deepest, dirtiest line of betrayal. I looked around the nearly empty business-class cabin. I hadn't flown commercial in years. Vanguard gave me the best of everything. They gave me comfort. They gave me status. They gave me wings. And they took it all back in a 20-minute meeting. The irony was the universe's most beautiful weapon. They had given me the means to track her, the expense accounts, the flight logs, the necessary evil of my deep network. They had made me rich enough and now wronged enough to drop everything and execute a transcontinental act of professional espionage. They had built the bullet. I was just the one aiming the gun. During the 9 hours over the Atlantic, I stopped thinking about the keyholder protocol entirely. That was a ticking bomb I had already armed. This trip was about the why. I researched him, Julian Hess, the Chief Innovation Officer at Ethelred Group, our biggest rival. The company Vanguard was currently suing for stealing proprietary logistics patents. That lawsuit was a time bomb under Project Titan. If Ethelred won, the $4 billion merger would be worthless, as the core patents would be ruled invalid. Elena wasn't just having an affair. She was trading in zero-sum secrets. Julian was providing her with internal knowledge of the Titan algorithm's architecture, the very data structure I was currently protecting with the keyholder lock, so she could hastily push the deal through before Ethelred's legal victory. In exchange, she was supplying him with Vanguard's confidential defense strategy for the patent infringement case. It wasn't romance. It was a mutually beneficial destruction of 2 companies for personal gain. She wasn't just stealing credit. She was trying to salvage a bad deal she helped engineer, and pin the whole toxic, illegal mess on me. The attempted scapegoating was simply insurance against her own treachery. The rage was no longer white-hot, it was freezing cold. Pure efficiency. I landed in Munich, rented a dull, anonymous car using my forged Anne ID, and drove straight to the rendezvous point my contact provided. A discreet, modern boutique hotel near the English Garden. A place where global commerce hides its ugly truths behind minimalist facades and exorbitant room service prices. I checked in and went straight to the penthouse level, where the executive business suites were located. I didn't knock. I didn't need to. I didn't need a confrontation. I just needed proof. Irrefutable, visual, time-stamped evidence. I found them in the hotel's private business lounge, a space designed for maximum discretion. It was hidden behind a retractable screen of polished steel and frosted glass, reserved specifically for VIP guests. They weren't kissing. They weren't even holding hands. They weren't even drinking. They were working with an intensity that was far more intimate than any embrace. Julian was leaning over a table, manipulating a holographic display. The projection was a complex three-dimensional data model of the proprietary algorithm of the Titan acquisition. The same digital crown jewel that was currently locked down and screaming for my biometric key back in New Jersey. Elena was beside him, completely immersed. Her red nails were tapping the glass surface of the table, tracing the lines on the projection. But the crucial detail was the physical file she held in her other hand, a thick, green-tabbed binder marked Vanguard Legal Defense Strategy, Ethelred Patent Case. This wasn't romance. This was a direct, actionable exchange of proprietary information. The legal defense strategy for the lawsuit, traded for the key to unlock the merger's final technical phase. I slipped further into the shadows of a nearby pillar, careful not to disturb the ambient temperature or the quiet air currents. I raised my burner phone, the camera zoomed in tight. The lighting was perfect high contrast, capturing the glow of the holographic screen and the title of the green-tabbed file. I took 20 pictures. Photos of Elena, Julian, the projected algorithm, and the physical Vanguard file. Each click was a nail in her corporate coffin. Each photograph was a federal crime. I felt nothing. No anger. No satisfaction. Just the cold, calm completion of a crucial task. I had the final lever. I had secured the kill switch for not just the merger, but for Elena's entire future. And then the system malfunctioned. A man walked into the lounge. He was tall, thin, impeccably dressed in a dark suit, and wearing the small, distinctive Vanguard logo pin on his lapel. Michael, Senior VP of European Regulatory Compliance. The man who had personally signed off on the keyholder protocol with me. He was here for the final compliance check before the Tuesday deadline. He saw Elena. He saw Julian Hess, the rival executive. He saw the illegal data projection. His face went instantly blank, then shifted to a horrified, frozen mask. And then, his eyes shifted across the room. They landed right on me. My heart seized. It wasn't the police. It wasn't Vance. It was worse. It was a man who knew me. Knew my methods and, crucially, knew the full implications of what he was seeing. He understood the keyholder lock, the compliance waiver, and now, the explicit industrial espionage occurring 3,000 miles from New Jersey. I didn't panic. Panic is a luxury I couldn't afford. I didn't turn away. I met his eyes across the wide, silent room. I gave him a single, deliberate nod, a silent agreement, a sign that I was the ghost. I was watching, and he was now a witness to a felony that could destroy his own career. I offered him a choice, without speaking a word: join the silence, or be crushed by the coming explosion. Michael froze. His mouth opened slightly, a silent intake of breath. He looked at Elena, then back at me. In that split second, I saw his entire career flash before his eyes. The years of diligence, the integrity he was known for, now poisoned by Elena's greed. Before he could decide, before the terror fully registered in Elena's periphery, I slid out of the shadows, walked past him, and disappeared into the hallway, leaving only the faint echo of my heels on the marble floor and the 20 photos now secured and encrypted in the cloud. I didn't know if he would tell Elena. I didn't care. The seed of paranoia had been planted not just about the merger, but about the betrayal within their own ranks. Michael now knew the truth, and a compliance officer with a secret is the most dangerous kind of ally. I was back in the game, 3,000 miles from home, carrying enough evidence to collapse 2 major corporations. I had my proof. But now they knew the ghost was real. And I had exactly 24 hours before the keyholder protocol locked Vanguard into an irreversible legal catastrophe. The data lock was a certainty. The only question was, how loud would the fallout be? I had to get back to New Jersey. And I had to choose my final weapon, the devastating proof of betrayal or the keyholder detonator. Michael saw me. He saw the truth. Did he turn back and warn Elena, or did he realize that the betrayal was too deep and decide to quietly join the ghost? I was flying blind across the Atlantic, trusting a moral compass I hadn't seen in years. It was a race against the clock. The keyholder protocol was about to go critical, and I had to be on the ground to deploy the evidence when the explosion began. I was running on pure adrenaline and the certainty of ruin for someone other than myself. The jet was my final cocoon of anonymity, flying me back to the eye of the storm. Every mile devoured was a mile closer to 0 hour. Michael. The image of his face frozen in that split second of realization in Munich was the most crucial piece of data I had collected. He was the unplanned variable. He was the one person who could either expose my current operation in Munich, the Anne alias, the surveillance, or, far more devastatingly to Elena, join my invisible army by simply staying silent. If he had panicked and gone straight to Elena, she would have instantly known she was being hunted. She would change her entire security posture, perhaps even trying to remotely trigger the keyholder protocol herself, corrupting the data before the ECB alert could fire. My beautifully timed detonation would become a messy fizzle. But Michael hadn't shouted. He hadn't lunged. He had done the most dangerous thing a corporate man can do when faced with irreconcilable truths. He had frozen. Compliance officers live in a world defined by the sacred geometry of rules and regulation. Their integrity is not just their currency. It is their shield against liability. What Michael saw was the systematic destruction of that integrity, delivered not by a rival, but by his direct superior, Elena. Elena wasn't just committing a financial crime. She was forcing Michael to cover it up, thus shattering his entire professional identity and opening him up to criminal charges. He had two terrible choices. The loud choice reporting Elena meant blowing up the merger, humiliating Vanguard publicly, and destroying his own career prospects due to the fallout. The quiet choice covering for her meant committing a felony that would land him in federal prison when the ECB audit finally arrived, which was now inevitable. I opened the communication log on my secure connection, the one that still listened to Vanguard's internal whispers. Thorne's script to digitally purge the waiver was still scheduled for 6 a.m., delayed by the line of code I injected. Elena and Vance believed their defense was secured, and the evidence of their conspiracy was about to vanish. But what about Michael? I filtered the recent encrypted messages, running multiple searches for his code name. Nothing. No desperate calls to Thorne or Vance. No frantic search requests for Titan algorithm security update. Complete, professional silence. An analyst's dream. He was observing. He was calculating the trajectory of his career based on the projected velocity of the scandal. He wasn't choosing sides. He was waiting for the winning side to become clear. He was waiting for the ghost to make the final, defining move. He knew my capabilities and he knew Elena's recklessness. His silence was the ultimate vote of no confidence in her strategy. T-12 hours. The keyholder protocol's final automated warning was about to trigger. The digital scream was intensifying. I needed to ensure my final strike landed precisely when Vanguard was at its most vulnerable, when their internal communications were focused entirely on the immediate technical meltdown. The original plan was pure technical collapse. Let the keyholder protocol run out, the data lock solidify, and the ECB alert fire. Vanguard fails to close the Titan deal, their stock plummets, and Elena is left holding the blame for the failure. But that plan left a fatal flaw. It didn't guarantee Elena's criminal exposure. Vance and Thorne could still effectively spin the failure as a sophisticated hack and leverage my negligence narrative to escape SEC oversight, claiming the waiver's deletion was simply part of the external sabotage. They would sacrifice me to save the institution. The photos changed everything. The evidence of Julian Hess and the shared files. The photos weren't just proof of an affair. They were undeniable proof of industrial espionage and insider trading during a multi-billion-dollar acquisition attempt. This went beyond civil liability. This was a criminal conspiracy that struck at the core of market integrity. It wasn't about the merger's failure. It was about the criminality of the attempt itself. I didn't need the keyholder protocol to collapse the deal anymore. I needed the keyholder protocol to create the maximum, high-volume chaos necessary to plant the evidence exactly where it couldn't be ignored or retracted. The diversion. I worked through the strategy one last time. The deployment timing had to be perfect. At T-4 hours, the ECB alert would go from a warning to a full breach notification. Vanguard's crisis management team Thorne and the external PR firm would be frantically trying to shut down the server rooms, trying to silence the digital scream. They would be entirely focused on the technical fire. They would be paralyzed. That was the moment for the social contagion. I drafted the final message. It wasn't a corporate email. It wasn't a blind public tip. It was a single, anonymous, high-density encrypted file. The payload. This file contained 3 essential components: the 20 photos, the digital copy of the fraudulent waiver, now publicly timestamped, and a single concise press release detailing the full scope of Elena's treason and Vance's complicity in the subsequent cover-up. The narrative was simple: betrayal and conspiracy. The target wasn't the police. The target wasn't the internal board, who could be managed. It was the market's immediate reaction. I routed the payload through 3 layers of dark web proxies, setting the final release trigger to T-3 hours. The final destination was strategically chosen: 2 major global financial news outlets known for their speed and appetite for scandal, targeting both the US and European editions. And crucially, to Sarah's secure personal email. Sarah, my loyal ghost on the inside, would ensure the document was distributed instantly among the executive analysts and key hedge fund managers. She would create a social wildfire inside Vanguard while the keyholder protocol was simultaneously creating the regulatory inferno. The simultaneous external exposure and internal failure would guarantee a catastrophic, untidy implosion. I was landing in New Jersey in 2 hours. I didn't need to physically walk into the Vanguard Tower. I just needed to be close enough to watch the blast radius from the comfort of my Hoboken apartment. The final action wasn't a technical triumph over an algorithm, it was psychological warfare and narrative control. I wasn't just aiming to make the merger fail. I was aiming to make Elena and Vance look like traitors and fools to the entire financial world, effective immediately. Their reputations would be vaporized before they even had time to draft a denial. I closed my laptop. T-1 hour until landing. T-12 hours until the keyholder protocol went critical. I finally felt ready. The ghost was home, and she was about to make a noise that would echo across the Hudson, trigger a flash crash, and permanently silence the roaring corporate heart of the city. I had the photos, I had the waiver, and I had the detonator timed. The trap was set, but Elena, now realizing Michael's silence and the true extent of my knowledge, wouldn't just sit and wait for the explosion. My final move would expose her. But what would her final, desperate move be? And what was Michael going to do when he landed back in New York? Was he an asset, or a liability? Landing at EWR was the easiest part of the whole operation. I was just Anne arriving from Europe. Invisible. The true challenge was the 4-mile drive to my apartment, fighting the instinct to speed, knowing every red light was a second closer to market open. I felt the strange, detached calm that only comes when you are utterly committed to a catastrophic outcome. I set up my command center in the living room, focused entirely on the view of the Manhattan financial district. 3 screens were deployed, one for the keyholder lock monitoring showing the escalating severity alerts, one for the global news wires, pre-filtered for keywords like Vanguard, Titan, and Patent, and one for the Vanguard stock ticker. The battlefield was laid out, and the clock was my only ally. T-4 hours. The European Central Bank's automated systems received the keyholder protocol's final irreversible notification. Breach imminent, data integrity compromised. Action required. I could feel the pressure surge across the river. A visible intensity in the lights of their executive floors. They weren't just fighting the clock anymore. They were fighting the highest tier of European financial regulation. The ECB notification wasn't a warning. It was the initiation of a formal inquiry. Thorne, the chief counsel, would be shouting about liability, desperately trying to draft a legal justification for the technical failure. Vance, the CEO, would be demanding a forced, manual override, prioritizing the merger money over the legal consequences. But every attempt they made to silence the alarm would only amplify the legal disaster. The keyholder was designed to be tamper-proof. Tampering proved criminal intent. They were completely cornered. And Elena? Elena would be executing her final, desperate contingency, the scapegoat narrative. I filtered the secure logs, watching their internal chaos in real time. Elena wasn't wasting time trying to fix the lock. She was racing to frame me before the true facts could emerge. Her last desperate act was to weaponize Vanguard's internal IT vulnerabilities against me. E to Vance 8:10 a.m. EST. The lock is not an internal malfunction. It is a targeted attack. Amelia's former associate, Gary IT, who was part of her personal security team, reported unauthorized access to the audit server 48 hours ago. She pre-planned this sabotage and used the security waiver as bait. We must release the press statement, pinning it on her immediately to stabilize the market and satisfy the regulators. She was rushing the scapegoat narrative, a comprehensive pre-written press release forcing Vance's hand to sign off on a lie, betting that the market would swallow the rogue employee story whole. Vance, predictable as ever in his cowardice, signed off. The internal communication confirming the release went live at 8:58 a.m. Too late, Elena. The window of opportunity to control the narrative had closed. At T-3 hours 9 a.m. EST, the payload went live. I watched the initial release. The single, high-density encrypted file dispersed across the major financial wire services, Bloomberg, Reuters, the Financial Times. The anonymity protocols held perfectly. It wasn't traced back to me. It was simply categorized as an anonymous, high-integrity leak from an executive whistleblower. Then, Sarah, my ghost, did her final, dangerous part. She immediately emailed the internal analyst list, the trading floor, and the highest value hedge fund clients urgent. See today's market report. Vanguard leak executive level, criminal implications. Her action ensured the news would hit Vanguard's trading partners before their own PR team could even issue a denial. The market absorbed the shock in less than 60 seconds. The initial headline wasn't about the technical failure of the keyholder lock. That was a risk the market could quantify. The story was about the far dirtier, unforgivable crime, criminal conspiracy, insider espionage. Vanguard exec traded merger secrets for rivals' legal defense files. Trust is the single currency of finance. Technical failure is accidental. Espionage is institutional rot. The photos were circulating instantly across every screen in every trading room. Elena and Julian Hess, illuminated by the glow of stolen algorithms. The unmistakable, green-tabbed Vanguard defense file. The proof was undeniable, visual, and devastating. The market reaction was brutal. An immediate, algorithmic sell-off triggered by the phrase industrial espionage. The keyholder protocol, the technical failure, was now just a footnote, a symptom of the criminal conspiracy. The true story was the deep, unmanageable rot at the top. They were panicking on two catastrophic fronts. The ECB was demanding explanations for the data breach and freezing related assets in Germany, while the SEC was receiving instant, corroborated tips about the industrial espionage, fueled by the circulating photos. Elena's reckless escape attempt and Vance's desperate cover-up were now headline news, broadcast worldwide. And then, Michael made his final, calculated move, the move that secured Vance's personal liability. Michael didn't report Elena to the press. He didn't join me publicly. He did something far more surgical, targeting Vance directly. He was the only person in the European compliance structure who could verify the integrity of the keyholder system's audit log. An internal message popped up on my secure feed routed through 3 separate Vanguard compliance channels, ensuring maximum visibility internally. It was from Michael, clean and precise. Confirmation. The 4.3 waiver digital record was not purged. It was recovered and validated on the central audit server at 6:30 a.m. Timestamp is prior to Amelia's termination. The current sabotage narrative is invalid. The original signed document exists. He didn't need to report the crime. He simply corrected the record, anonymously, internally, confirming that the evidence of Vance and Elena's original cover-up, the fraudulent waiver I had digitally time-locked, was back on Vanguard's server, visible to internal auditors. He protected his own integrity by exposing the CEO's lie. Vance was now formally exposed for conspiring to destroy official evidence. The keyholder protocol finished its work. The final data blocks solidified into an unusable cipher. The Titan merger was technically, legally, and financially dead. Elena was exposed as a traitor and conspirator. Vance was exposed as complicit in evidence tampering. I was the only one left standing in the silence. The ghost had returned home, and she had cleaned house. The debt was paid in full. The initial blast was over. Elena's treason was public and the merger was dead. But the SEC, the ECB, and the German federal police were just starting their investigation. The Vanguard Tower was silenced, but the legal firestorm was just beginning. And I still had one more loose thread to manage, Sarah. My ghost in the machine. What happens to the loyal subordinate who risks everything when the tower collapses? Market open was pandemonium. It was a digital bloodbath. The news cycle moved with the velocity of an algorithmic trading bot. Vanguard couldn't even issue their pre-drafted scapegoat press release about my supposed sabotage before the SEC halted trading on their stock. The payload had already contaminated the entire system, establishing a counter-narrative of criminal conspiracy that was too compelling to ignore. Elena's clumsy narrative died before it was born. I watched the Vanguard Tower. I didn't see the building anymore. I saw a tombstone, a monument to greed and poor judgment. Vance, predictable to the last, chose the path of least resistance, immediate resignation and a public statement claiming he was misled by trusted subordinates. He threw Elena to the wolves to save his golden parachute, but the internal audit fueled by Michael's precise compliance ping would show his complicity in ordering the destruction of the waiver. His departure was less a resignation and more an institutional sacrifice. He would spend the next decade fighting regulatory litigation and watching his personal fortune dwindle. His entire legacy was reduced to the phrase espionage scandal. Elena was the ultimate casualty, paying for her betrayal with her entire future. The German federal police and the SEC moved on Julian Hess and Elena simultaneously, leveraging the international nature of the crime. Espionage and insider trading. The dual charge ensures neither the US nor Europe will be a safe harbor for her. Her career was over. The red nails, the impeccable suits, the power lunches, they all look rather useless in the back of a black SUV. The debt was paid. The system had cannibalized the traders, exactly as it was designed to do when pushed to the breaking point. The integrity of the market, once threatened, always rights itself by consuming its weakest links. But the game wasn't quite over. Securing my own clean slate was one thing, but I had pulled a friend into the dark with me. Sarah. My trust in her was the only personal risk I took. She had risked her career to distribute the payload, a necessary act of bravery I had demanded, knowing she was the only person with the access and conviction to do it. I owed her more than loyalty. I owed her a complete, untraceable future. A clean break. I utilized a final, unused piece of software from the keyholder architecture, a proprietary data deletion sequence that could precisely erase metadata associated with specific internal communications. It was a ghost script, perfectly designed to remove every log, every trace of Sarah's involvement with the payload dissemination. It wasn't about prevention anymore. It was about sanitization. But digital erasure wasn't enough. People talk. Corporate memory, like water, always finds a path back. I logged into a dark asset account, one I had set up years ago. Untraceable and filled with profits from a particularly clever, high-risk M&A deal that skirted the edge of ethics. I initiated a transfer to a private, highly secure trust fund in her name. A substantial, life-changing sum enough to retire comfortably at 40. I sent one final anonymous message routed through layers of encryption that would make the NSA blush, ensuring even the act of communication vanished moments after being read. It contained only 2 words: go clean. It wasn't a warning. It was a release. It was permission. She was free to quit, to start a small business, to vanish, or to remain at Vanguard and be hailed as a loyal, diligent survivor. The money was her insurance policy against corporate memory and future regret. The silence was my final act of loyalty, my last corporate transaction. And Michael? The compliance officer who chose strategic silence. He didn't need a payout. He needed vindication and a clear path to advancement. By forcing the truth about the destroyed waiver onto the internal server, he secured his own position as the single trustworthy pillar in a crumbling institution. He was the only one left standing who could guide Vanguard through the immediate brutal regulatory firestorm. He would be promoted to the head of global compliance by the end of the day, tasked with cleaning up the very mess I created. A cold, silent victory, the best kind in this city. He became the warden of the tombstone. I closed my laptop. The screens went dark. The noise from the news anchors was silenced with a press of a single power button. The world I had just destroyed vanished into a black mirror. It was all noise and light, and now there was only quiet reflection. They thought they could ruin me. They thought they could steal my mind, my work, and my reputation. They forgot that the greatest strategist never relies on a single asset. She relies on her ability to see 10 steps ahead, to understand the moral currency of her opponents, and, when necessary, to burn the chessboard down and walk away from the resulting ashes. The name Amelia carried too much baggage. The title M&A strategist was a shackle, a cage built of status and obligation. I was neither of those things anymore. I was simply the ghost who settled her debts and vanished without a trace. I walked out the door. I left the keys on the counter. The red ledger went into the bag not for revenge, but as a detailed map of the toxic landscape I was escaping. I wasn't going back to corporate life. That chapter was closed. I was going to disappear into the vast silence I had just created. The world always needs a ghost. And this one was just getting started. Her next move? Untraceable.